Good intro, Jason. Way to go. Good start to the video, you punk.
What's up, everybody? Welcome back to Taste Like Music. Jason, Joe, and Crams are here. It is Suede Week on the channel. They just released a new record this past Friday called Autofiction, just dropped. So that'd be a good time to hit them. 9 studio albums. For those of you in the US, you may know this band as the London Suede, as I guess legal issues forced them to release their records under a different name in different places. So the Suede, London Suede, whatever you want to call them, that's what we're doing. I guess considered one of the big 4 of Britpop. That may come into play on Thursday for side 3. We will see. But how much did we know going into the week?
Very, very little, Jason. I think I'd heard the song The Wild Ones, and that's about it.
I'm actually, the first album from Suede I ever heard was the 2016 one, Night Thoughts. And then I went back during our album of the year series and listened to a bunch. So I was relatively familiar. I'd heard about half of these, so but still less familiar with them than the other big 3, the Pulps, the Blurs, the Oasis of the world. This was an interesting one to catch up, because these were everyone considered them the first real Britpop band, so kind of missing a big piece of Britpop history there.
Yeah, same. I can't believe, I don't think I've actually ever heard a Suede song prior to this week. I was familiar with Suede. I was aware of Suede the whole time working in the music store. I knew who Suede was. I think I recognize every album cover, but going through, I don't think I knew a single song, which was interesting. I thought I knew more than I did. I seem to know nothing. So all brand new for me. If you don't know this channel, we deep dive a different band every week. We listen to all of the studio albums and rank them on Tuesday, give you our top 10 songs of the same band on Wednesday, and have a third discussion video on Thursdays. If that sounds like the kind of content you're into, make sure you subscribe to the channel, hit the bell for notifications. While you're at it, hit the like button on this video. And without further ado, we will get into our rankings. Who wants to go first?
I think maybe I will start. And I've got a pretty big range here of my star ratings. And I'm starting with a 2-star record. I don't think this album is very good. And that album is A New Morning from 2002. I think the first song, Positivity, is pretty, but I don't care for the lyrics. It seems really lame. I like when they do kind of just that really dire desperation, full of melodrama kind of deal. But parts of this album really seem like it's their adult alternative record. And that's kind of falling into a trap where you get these early 2000s records by bands that have been out for 10 plus years. And they feel like they need to be the mature ones of the bunch and do this kind of just plain vanilla, straightforward. There's a lot of acoustic work here. They feel like everyone that liked them 10, 15 years ago, they need to soothe their interests now and do something, now that they're commuting to work and have kids, they need to make this happen. And that's kind of how I feel with A New Morning. It's very clean and polished, really lacks the big emotions and big power, and is much more tired. Lonely Girls might be my favorite song on it. It's kind of cool, but I still can't tell if it's super lame or not, or kind of clever. It even kind of sounds at times like this is a hair metal band doing a polished down kind of, more relaxed, exhausted kind of album. Jason's grimacing because it's the most boring album, and Jason's well, I thought it was pretty good. But it's very safe, very vanilla, and it doesn't have any satisfying cheese to it or anything. Beautiful Loser feels like an Oasis kind of throwaway. There's no moments really where Anderson stands out or runs away with a song or part of a song. Album just really lacks identity. It feels like it's produced by someone who has no idea what Suede's strong suits are. And yeah, Astro Girl is pretty lame. Untitled is boring. I think this is just their kind of blah. We're tired. We don't have anything left in the tank, and they would take an 11-year hiatus in the studio after this. And there's really nothing interesting about this, and I don't ever want to hear it again. So A New Morning, 2 stars. That's my number 9.
Should I go next? Should we save Joe for the end since he's the resident Britpop fan?
Yeah, I think that's a good idea.
I'll go second. Strong disagree on A New Morning, but my bottom at number 9 is going to be their second to last record, The Blue Hour from 2018, produced by Alan Moulder. This kind of follows up the record before it, Night Thoughts, kind of in its footsteps with the heavy orchestration. You've got the City of Prague Philharmonic all over this record. The opener, As One, is a pretty sleepy, string-laden track. I guess a bit of a spoiler, I'm not that into the record before this one either. That won't take too long to get to for me. But I think the second track on the record kind of turns things around a little with Wastelands. I think they get back to rocking a bit on that track. It's a big track with a pretty strong chorus. But then it kind of just, I don't know, it gets into like this big, overblown, melodramatic ballad type of stuff with strings all over it. The vocal performances, I think, are really corny on this record. Beyond the Outskirts, I think, is the worst offender of that sort of thing. Just supposed to be like this big emotional tune, but it all feels really like put on and forced. There's also this like bridge section in that track where they like rock out, but that doesn't really work either. Chalk Circles, I think, is really corny. It's like this theatrical interlude. Not really sure what to call it, but I don't see the point of it. I think this album has some of their lowest lows. They're flirting with like a heaviness on this. I don't know what they're trying to do exactly, and maybe they're like trying to be Foles or something. I don't think it fits them too well. I think it's way overly serious. They need some of that glammy fun to be brought back in. Even just subtly, it would help a lot. I just think this record is really overblown, dour. It's a downer. I just didn't find it to be much fun at all. Not very tuneful, pretty bland. 3 stars.
Maybe. I sort of agree with that. I don't really agree with Cramser's bottom, though. My bottom is going to be Head Music from 99. So after Bernard Butler left and they had done Coming Up, they're doing Head Music. And Anderson's addicted to crack at this point, and their keyboardist basically spent a whole year in bed because he had chronic fatigue syndrome. So this album just feels like, let's kind of pick what's going on in Britain, get a little bit of that like trip hop flair in there, like try and change it up a little bit because we don't want to stay in place. We don't want to seem like we're missing Bernard Butler too much. And some interesting guitars. There's a lot of effects on Richard Oakes's guitar, like a lot of flangers and phasers and all sorts of kind of weird stuff to disguise the fact that these songs just aren't that good. I think in general, Hi-Fi has a lot of that trip hop flavor, and I don't know. I mean, there's nothing great on here. I don't know. It's just missing just like that suedeness that they had established. It's missing like the glammy stuff from earlier. It's missing that sense of debauchery. There's some decent songs. I think Down is pretty. Everything Will Flow has some nice strings. Savoir Faire is not great though. I can't get enough. Kind of sounds like Blur. And I think the best track on here is Asbestos, which has like a cool old school psychedelic, moody, groovy, almost rooted in like the 60s, and this cool like whistle synth going on. And it just sounds like super late 90s. Like this is exactly what the late 90s sound like, which I don't like. Like I don't like 97 to 99, that whole like era. So this one, I don't know, it just seems a little too lightweight. They don't quite know what they're doing, and they don't quite like they don't nail this sound. Like I think they nailed what they started with, the glam, and I think they get back into their sound after this. But I think this is sort of just like an experimentation that didn't quite connect. So I have it at I have 3.5, but it's really probably like a 3. It's decent. I like Indian Strings too, so we'll say 3.5.
Didn't see that rating coming from what you said, but it's cool. That's kind of your MO. My number 8 is Bloodsports, and I'm not quite up to 3 yet. I don't recommend it, but it is. Yeah, we're talking about the boring albums here. Jason's like all excited about, and it is pretty. It's definitely much better than my number 9. It's got kind of that synthy, anthemic, indie kind of pop of the time. There's like U2 sensations right off the bat with Barriers. More musical than A New Morning. Like New Morning is just kind of straightforward. Like let's pluck acoustic guitars and write 4-chord songs and let the drums fill in. Much more musical. Snowblind, I think, is actually a really good song. And I think Anderson sounds really reinvigorated here. Like 11 years apart from this and A New Morning, that you would have no way of knowing that this is the older, much older version than him on New Morning. So I think that's pretty cool. Still at times it sounds like there's just like different writers than like what we know from Suede. Like this is like their artistry isn't nearly the same. It just has like their dressing on it a little bit. For the Strangers sounds like them doing like someone's just like really basic, like graduating rock and roll song kind of, or rock and roll school kind of song. Really big edge like guitar sounds at time. Not nearly as exciting as their old stuff. Sometimes I feel I'll Float Away is pretty nice. It's got like that dreamy old school Britpop kind of sense, has a nice build to it. And it feels at times like there are moments on here. It just feels like they have something left in the studio at this point, but they're not really comfortable to let it out. Then you've got What Are You Not Telling Me, which has a really cool haunting sound to it. It also just kind of sounds like a song you've heard a million times before. So I feel like they're just kind of emulating what's around them rather than really getting their stuff out. And then the album really dies on a drag, slow moving jams that occasionally pick up toward the end. It's not active enough to dislike on this album, but it's hard to get into. So I just got it at 2.5. This is like the embodiment of a 2.5 album of something that I'm just like, it's okay. I don't want to listen to it, but I don't actively push it away. So that is my number 8, Bloodsports.
All right. My number 8 is Head Music. I'm pretty much with Joe on this one, 1999. And here come the electronic elements, of course. And, I don't know, musically, it's not entirely different from Coming Up, I don't think. But it's just all those production choices that do not work so well. Anderson, like Joe said, was dealing with a crack addiction, which was, I guess, pretty bad at this point. And, we go through all these bands and we read about all these different people, and all the time we run into like heroin addict, had a coke problem, was struggling with alcohol. When you read someone's a crack addict, it's just like, oh shit, really kind of takes you by surprise. I don't know. I think I actually do like the guitar tones on this album more than any of their prior records. They have a bigger, fuller sound. I think Steve Osborne does a good job with the production in that sense. But the vocal delivery really starts to kind of grate on me on this record. He gets a lot nasalier and whinier on this record for some reason. He starts to sound a lot like Brian Molko from Placebo at times. And I like Placebo, but probably like in small doses. And it's not working for Anderson on this record too well. It's kind of annoying, I think. And I don't know, maybe it's the result of the guitars like eating up more of the mid range that he feels he like needs to go up there more, or maybe it's just a result of being on crack that he starts singing higher. I don't know what it is, but it's kind of annoying. I think most of the tunes on this record are just okay, but there's not a whole lot of standouts. Everything Will Flow is all right. The use of the acoustic guitars on that track opens up some nice space for the electronic elements to actually add some atmosphere. She's in Fashion, I think, is a pretty good song, but it's overwhelmed by the production a bit. The title track is like the most 1999 thing I've ever heard. The line, give me head, give me music instead, or whatever, is pretty cringy. I don't know. It's like they think they're being edgy or something. I don't know. It's not great. I think most of the songwriting here is middle of the road. And there's a few tracks that like elevate above that, but those are kind of smushed back down by the production. Even though sonically, I think it's a good sounding record. Like, I think the low end is where it should be. Everything like sounds good. It's just like all these gurgling synths and stuff are really annoying and kind of distracting from the tunes, I think. So, I don't know. It's not great. 3 stars for Head Music.
All right. My number 8's going to be A New Morning. And it is a more middle of the road kind of boring album. Like, I guess this is what they went to after Head Music sort of, that whole trip hop thing faded by 2002. It's kind of out of the limelight. So they had a bit of a new sound, but it's very middle of the road. They got Stephen Street to come on to produce this one. And Anderson's vocals, which, like Jason said, were extremely high on Head Music, these feel like a lot lower and sort of like plain almost. Like he's trying not to be like Brett Anderson anymore. Like he wants to be like a normal, I don't know, like one of the Gallaghers or something. But it's an interesting sound in the fact that it's just like not the Suede sound. Alex Lee comes in on keys and synths, and I do like that because he brings in like he's a Wurlitzer, a clavinet, a Rhodes, a Mellotron on certain tracks. So you do have that sound. It's not quite as much synth. I think Oakes's guitar takes a little more space. Like Cramsworth, there's more acoustics and stuff in there as well. And I think there's a lot of good songs, but I don't think if I remember like any of these after going through their discography. I don't think I wrote down one like, oh, this could be on my top 10 songs list. It's just kind of there in good fashion. You know, Lonely Girls has a nice acoustic guitar driven melody. Beautiful Loser is kind of nice and jaunty. It's a nice pop song. But it just all feels too normal for Suede. I miss the debauchery. I miss the glamminess. I miss even sort of the electronics of head music. At least those were like different for them. This feels just like way too normal. But I like this band a lot. So it's still 3.5 stars because I think Anderson can just write anything and make it sound good. And I think it's a fine album, but in their discography, it's rather ordinary. So 3.5 stars.
All right, my number 7 is Head Music, but I like it more than you guys. I've got it at 3 stars, which means it's good. Naturally, it's 1999, so the songs have that much needed digitalized style of texture and effects, which we all can't stand. Electricity, I think, is a really cool pop rock song. I like Savoir Faire, really cool. There's more groove on this album. There's like more R&B kind of influence. But then there's like that grungy synth coming in and out, like full of like vibrations. And I think Can't Get Enough sounds like a collective soul tune, like right out of here. Like they're going for like just that guitars and synth, and you can't tell the difference. And there's like a sunny perkiness to everything. And there is some cool kind of trippy thumping rhythm at times. And the strings and everything will flow are a bit much for me. So there's like overproduction, like we're talking about when you guys said with 1999. Down is rather bland. I think She's Into Fashion is a pretty cool song, but it is so overproduced. Asbestos is really sci and cool. It's got like a James Bond spy kind of feel to it. I also think the title track is so 1999, but I actually kind of like the huge kick drum in it. So there are things about it that I like. I'm just never going to love this era or this style in this era. Except for me, I do really like Elephant Man, which I think is like cool and simple and just kind of sparsely uses all of these things we're complaining about. I think it's really cool. And actually, I think the second half of the album is really much more interesting because they're more weirder songs. They're less radio friendly. Like obviously they're trying to really propel themselves into maybe the mainstream a little bit with doubling down on this sound, which is really popular with other bands. And the first half are like these radio friendly songs illustrated by all of these techniques and stuff that are done by everyone else. And then they have their more weirder artistic stuff still with that annoying production, but at least it's more interesting. I think Hi-Fi is kind of cool. So I actually like it. I think it's a good record. Head Music, 3 stars, my number 7.
All right. My number 7 is going to be Night Thoughts from 2016. This one was also accompanied by a feature film. After making, I think, a pretty successful comeback with Bloodsports, they pivot somewhat with this. They load up the record with strings. It's very grand in scope, cinematic. A lot of the music was completed, though, before Anderson had lyrics, before he had melodies. And that method of writing can work sometimes, certainly. However, a lot of times I think you can tell when that's happening. And I think this is a case of that. And I don't think it's good. Like when you can tell, there's a problem. I think you don't get the same kind of like reaction from the musicians reacting to the melody and things like kind of moving harmoniously. Things feel a lot more static, and it's just less interesting that way. I think it's a good sounding record, but there aren't really any surprises on it. Nothing is too memorable. Bloodsports, I think, could have been a 90s album. It could have, fallen right after Coming Up or something like that. Whereas this one feels like a band in middle age and like having to come up with some kind of concept to keep things interesting for them. It's a bit of that like Foo Fighters syndrome where you have to have like a big reason to sell the record. And I don't know. I just think it's pretty boring. I didn't have really a single standout track on this one. 3 stars for Night Thoughts.
Oof, way off. My number 7 is going to be The Blue Hour. And this is the second sort of following Night Thoughts that has like a big, like interconnected kind of like songs flow into each other. And there's little like, connecting tissue throughout. And this one ups the strings even more. There's just strings all over this thing. Different producer, Alan Moulder. And this one, I really thought Night Thoughts felt like a full band piece. Like I could hear the guitar, the bass, the drums, like everything felt like a band. This feels like orchestra music with like the band sort of pieced on afterwards, kind of filling in the gaps. Because there's just so many strings. It's a little overwhelming. It becomes too big. It's just too grand. It just kind of hits you over the head too many times with like big swelling strings. And like, yeah, you're supposed to feel that emotion from the strings and everything, but I just think it's too much. There are some good rock songs. Cold Hands, Killer Little Rock tune. Kind of reminds me of somebody like AFI, actually. It's got sort of like a, almost not quite a punk edge, but like that alternative rock edge to it. And I think Anderson sounds great still. His vocals pretty much throughout the whole catalog. Really good. He never really loses that high falsetto, which is good. He can bounce up and down all around. I don't notice Richard Oakes much on this album, other than the couple rock ones, Wastelands, Beyond the Outskirts, Don't Be Afraid If Nobody Loves You. Like you can hear some good guitar in there, but for the most part, just too many strings. I think it's a good album. I like the lyrics. I like the lyric content. I like the feel of it. Sort of like Suede venturing into the suburbs a little bit, looking for like the darkness and everything out there instead of the big city hustle and bustle of their early stuff. So they're branching out a little bit, but a little too many strings to make it a great album. 3.5 stars still for this. I think it's good, but not great. A lot of good for me for Suede. I can listen to any of these, but in comparison, it's just a good album.
My number 6 is Night Thoughts. You get that big new anthemic pop rock sound, continuing from Bloodsports, mixed with the strings, the gloominess. I think Outsiders is really cool because it has a new kind of rhythm and rocking sense to it. It's got like a real serious streak in it and a guitar pattern that they've never really done before. So they're at least flexing a little bit and getting more comfortable with like doing what their inner ambitions have got. Nothing crazy with the sound and production, pretty standard for its time, but it's got a lot of good approach to how the album is going to come across and feel. Like No Tomorrow brings some really good upbeat variety right when it should. And where Bloodsports kind of seems aimless to me, this seems pretty mature, and the songs are coming back with like love and loss with more level-headed maturity. There's definitely more drama and grandeur than Bloodsports and New Morning, and that's what I want, so I appreciate that. I think, you get the cinematic nature of it a lot, which is also what I want. Pale Snow brings that dense cinematic quality, and Anderson's starting to sound like himself again. Love the guitar tone on that track. And it moves great into I Know How to Reach You. And to be honest, if those two things were kind of linked up as one song, it might be nominated for me tomorrow. I think there's some really touching moments and peacefulness to this album. There's some really cool bass and beat to what I'm trying to tell you. Songs compared to like Bloodsports to me just have more thought and more variety, and the album has more variety. There's some duds, like I think Tightrope is pretty dull. Learning to Be is okay. Like Kids is fun and should come much earlier in the album, probably before Tightrope. There's just kind of too much of a puddle in that one section. I Can't Give Her What She Wants. I think that song is great lyrically and has a really cool like dark dream quality to it. The album just got this really cool like dark remembrance, memoir, eulogy kind of feel. Closes strong with When You Were Young and The Fur and the Feathers. I think for the most part they close their albums out pretty well, usually on a more slower, somber note, like a big send-off. So I liked it. I like the more kind of dark gloominess approach that they'll really double down on the Blue Hour, but I've got it at 3 stars. I think it's a good album. It's a very sleepy record, which I think is cool.
All right, my number 5 is Autofiction, the newest one that came out Friday. I think, they get away from the dour and melodramatic theatrics of the previous two albums. Ed Bowler comes back. They start rocking a bit more again, which is good. I think it's welcome. And I think it's a pretty solid effort. The Only Way I Can Love You, I think it's pretty strong. She Still Leads Me On, I think is a good opener. I wish there was a little bit more space and finesse in the arrangements. I feel like everything on this record kind of just blares at you at like full blast. But they're rocking out. They're getting back to that. So it's fine. It's okay for what it is. They do break things up occasionally, like with the piano ballad, Drive Myself Home, which is pretty good. Shadow Self is cool, where they kind of let the rhythm section take over. A nice fuzz bass. They're kind of driving the song while the guitar kind of dips in and out, playing these arpeggiated lines. I don't think it's a great album by any means. Nothing on it really blew me away, but I think it got them out of the rut they were in with the previous two records, where it felt like they wanted to be more than they were. And I think this at least shows that they can still like do what they used to do at a pretty reasonably high level for as long as they've been around. I think it's a pretty decent record. I've got it at 3.5 stars.
All right, my number 6, also Autofiction, but I'm bumping up to 4 stars. I think it's very good, and I think as a whole, it's return to the big energy. I've heard some critics labeling it a punk album almost, and I don't know what the hell they're talking about, but there is a lot more energy. The strings are mostly gone. Buller comes back to produce. And I think it's just more Suede sounding, like Jason was saying. He's absolutely right. It sounds like the old Suede. And, Suede evolved. Like, they did the orchestra thing, and that was cool. But eventually you got to return to your roots, and I think they do that here. Oakes's guitar sounds great. I hear a lot more bass and drums. Like, you can really hear the band. And it feels like a whole band effort. All 4 of them, or all 5 of them, really contributing a little bit more. Personality disorder, great springy bass line. Anderson's vocal still great. He still cries out every word, like his life depends on it, which is great. I love it. I love the passion and the emotion in all his lyrics and all his delivery. I think it's great. And the fact you can hear all of it more really kind of shows off how good of a band they are. I think sometimes that gets forgotten about, because you really do concentrate on Anderson, and either Butler and Oakes kind of take the limelight. But Drive Myself Home brings back some of those strings. Black Ice, though, is a great bouncy rocker, great big chorus. Oakes's guitar, love the tone on that one. Love the juicy bass on Shadow Self. Love the strong synth-driven chorus on It's Always the Quiet Ones. Guitar tone on What Am I Without You's big crescendos are great. It sounds like an old school Suede album. I think it's great. I love the final track, Turn Off Your Brain and Yell. That's kind of where that energy comes back in. And I think the album gets better as it goes along, really culminating and climaxing in that big old glorious triumphant final track. So 4 stars for me for Autofiction.
Yeah, I'm pretty much in line with Joe here. I've got it at 3.5. Less darkness and goth than the previous 2 albums, and going for more straight rock. I think this is their meat and potatoes rock record. I'm going to say something Joe will have to agree with, but I will hate to hear. It's got some Interpol vibes on it, with just kind of those angular kind of just arpeggios and like serious riffs, and which I like. I think She Still Leads Me On is really good. Like, it really is a good song. It's a great opener. I think it's a great thing for them to get back in the mainstream and get some, attention. It's kind of basic indie rock and roll, which I dig. They do it really well. There's hooks, there's memorable moments, and they feel alive and young and excited. And it's probably more than any other album got more of a live band feel to it. Like, has probably less production than any other album they've got. There's not a lot done in the mix. And, it's kind of one of those albums where it's just filled with good rockers. Personality Disorder is pretty badass. It's rock and roll, guitar part driven, lively bass, lively drums, great frontman quality with Anderson, singing his heart out, the passion's there. I love the line, nothing as bad as the time we kill from 15 at the beginning of that song. The songs are, for the most part, upbeat and downhill. Everything sounds great. There are those songs that kind of break up the pace a little bit, like Jason was saying. Yeah, it's meat and potatoes for them. It works really well. Nothing fancy here, but still kind of like a little bit visceral. And it's like their version of a straightforward, hard, but melodic record. Like it's not basic. It's one of those albums where you are certain that pretty much everything on the album will translate live with a ton of energy and sound pretty close to the album. So that's cool. And also one of those albums where it sounds like there's at least 6 or 7 songs that could have been an opener on the album or could open a show. So they're just like, there's just so much energy all around it. Maybe to a fault, like Jason was saying, like some sparseness would be good. Everything's just coming at you all the time and popping off like fireworks. But probably appreciate it more for how when it comes in their catalog, like if this were like a new band and this is their first album, that would make sense. But like for them to just come out with this like really youthful, crazy, energized rock album is pretty cool. I love the way he wails on That Boy on Stage. I think Dry Myself is really cool and full of melancholy, and you get those big cinematic swells with the strings and everything and the drama that you want. And then it goes back into Black Ice, like Joe was saying, with that big bass, almost Black Keys-esque. Shadow Self is pretty cool. Love those dark arpeggios. It's all the quiet ones, probably has the most synth of anything on this, and it's still good. Like most of their stuff, like I was saying before, it gets softer at the end. That seems to be their thing. This is a really good record. I've only listened to it once. I wish I could get another listen in, but it just came out Friday. I'm at 3.5, but I flirted with the idea of 4. But is it a great album? No. Is it really good? Yes. So that's where I'm at.
All right. My number 5 is Coming Up. This is the first record with Richard Oakes on guitar. He was only 17 years old at the time. This is also the record where they add Neil Codling on keys. This one went to number 1 in the UK. It was a concentrated effort on their part to make a less complex record than Dogman Star, more straightforward. As Anderson put it, they were aiming just to make 10 hits. Definitely their glammiest record. Trash is a great lead-off track and a great lead single, really immediate and catchy. Lazy has a similarly catchy vibe to it. Oakes, I think, playing in tone is very similar to Butler. I actually don't notice a whole ton of difference. I think they're successful in what they were aiming for. Simple, catchy tunes. It's got a real celebratory feel. Got the hand claps and the la 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 falsetto backing vocals, all that kind of glam stuff that they're throwing in. I think it's a good sounding record. Although I do think it's maybe a little more one-dimensional than their first 2 records. I'm not sure that it has like the same replayability. Like, even though the tunes are catchy, I don't think the melodies are as interesting. And it also has very like uniform production across the majority of the album. Oakes is using like the same guitar tone across pretty much the whole record. So there's not a lot of variation. I still think it's a pretty good, enjoyable listen. I think it's a fun record to listen to, but I don't know. It doesn't feel like there's a ton of like depth to it to me, sonically or maybe thematically. So just a fun little record. 3.5 stars for Coming Up.
All right, my number 5 is gonna be Bloodsports. Their comeback from the extended absence after whatever the hell it's called, the album that everyone forgets that they made, A New Morning, except Jason, who's probably going to have it at number 1. But I think Bloodsports, good, kind of back to basics, back to Suede basics. I think it's very powerful, anthemic, barriers, great leads from Oakes. I feel like he's really starting to come into his own. Jason mentioned that he couldn't really tell the difference between Butler and Oakes on Coming Up. I think that's ludicrous. But I think by this point, after the comeback, Oakes is more of an equal. I think with Anderson, I think he was kind of in his shadow and in the shadow of Butler on the 2 records after Dogman Star, 3 records after Dogman Star. On Bloodsports, I feel like the band's more like equality there. Like there's more noticeable work from Oakes and more noticeable stuff from Osman on bass and Codling on synths. So it feels like a real band effort, which I like. And Oakes's leads, not quite as dynamic as Butler, but I think they're very interesting on this. I think the tones are all really good. And Sabotage for the Strangers hit me. all really good tracks. There's more piano, more bass, I think, apparent in the mixes, which I like. And while it starts off pretty upbeat, like it gets really dark as it goes through. A lot of grief and regret, and Anderson exploring all that good stuff. I think he's a very good lyricist, very interesting. Obviously, he's still a great singer. I think he sounds wonderful as usual, better than he did on New Morning or Coming Up or Head Music. A little more, in the, without going to like dog whistle range sometimes. Just sounds like he's not trying to be the main focus all the time, which is good. And I think it's just a good album, and there's not a ton to say about it. 4 stars for Bloodsports.
I am not hearing the same thing you guys apparently are, but that's why we do this. My number 4 is Coming Up. I've got a 3.5. I think it's really good. Bit more of that like kind of static electric sound. Kind of with Jason, it is kind of one-dimensional. Going super Bowie on the opener trash. Like it's really ridiculous at times. But there's some fun pop and more like electronic streamlined sound. They're kind of in party mode a little bit on this record. Like it's not as like wallowing as the first two. And I think maybe because of that, I don't find it as daring or engaging, but I still like it. Totally rock and roll for its time. And the production's great. I think it sounds amazing. I think it's really robust and dynamic with everything standing out while serving a more encompassing sound, which is always hard to do. It's a very bright, colorful album, not as shadowy and full of desire. And at least the content has more confidence to it, which is cool. I like the pop and the guitar on Lazy. I think that's really cool. By the Sea is really nice. I like that they're always throwing in those ballads pretty much on every single album. It's a bit by numbers of a tune, but I think it serves its weight on the album. Some of their creativity, I think, on this album is sacrificed. They are still them, but blending in a little bit more. Like you could picture Oasis covering some of these songs or other Britpop bands. I love the guitar riffing on Beautiful Ones. In general, I want them a bit gloomier than more of like this Bowie glam rock junior kind of stuff. I think Star Crazy is badass. It's infectious, and there aren't really any bad or dull moments. I love Saturday Night. I think their albums just have this really cool poetic nature where they just say goodbye really well. And Saturday Night probably does that the best. It's awesome. So I think it's really good. It's a lot of fun. It doesn't stand out as much, and I think it lacks depth, like Jason said, but it's a fun rock record. 3.5 for me. It's my number 4.
All right, my number 4 is Bloodsports. They bring Ed Buller back for this, the first record that they did in 11 years. They also bring Neil Codling back. He rejoins the band on this record. They described it, I think, as a cross between Dogman Star and Coming Up, which to me is kind of like saying, like, whatever version of the old Suede you liked, we're going to try to appeal to everybody. I think it does do a decent job of hitting that mark, though. It feels like a 90s rock record. Oakes's guitar tone kind of reverts back to the Coming Up sound. With Buller back in the fold, he kind of has a signature guitar tone. It seems like the records that he produced all kind of have a sort of similar thing happening with the guitars. I enjoy Oakes's guitar playing a lot on Snowblind. It's got this really like wiry part in the chorus, which is really cool. The bass tone, though, on this record is really round, and it's not as defined as usual. I don't think you can really pick out the playing as well, which is a shame because I think Mat Osman is a really good bass player. The writing, though, on this record, I think is pretty strong. The first 3 tracks, I think, are all pretty good. For the Strangers is a nice, like, epic ballad type of song, a little U2-ish. Hit Me, I think, is really catchy. I think for being such a long time between albums, they do a great job of, like, recapturing former glories. I think this could have easily been, like, a follow-up to Dogman Star or Coming Up. It feels like part of that era. It also doesn't feel, like, contrived or forced. Like, it doesn't seem like a hair band putting the makeup back on in their 40s. Like, it feels natural still. The one thing, I think it is a little front loaded. It falls apart a little at the end. A lot of the slower tracks are kind of near the back. So that hurts it a tiny bit, but I think it's a good effort, especially for them in 2013 and after such a long layoff. So a good record. Bloodsports, 3.5 stars.
All right, my number 4 is going to be Coming Up, like Ramser's. And I think this is a solid Solid album. Obviously, they were trying to get out of the shadow of Bernard Butler leaving, and so they kind of had to go in a different direction. I feel like they really couldn't do another Dogman star that was just so big and epic and just grandiose and cinematic. So they go, pop route basically. And Anderson said that they wanted to create the slider T-Rex for the 20th century. 12 hits is what they wanted, or 10 hits or whatever, however number of songs are on here. I don't think they quite get to those heights, but I think they do a very good job of making every song a good pop song. And, a lot of that glamminess. There's very little like pretension here. Like sometimes Butler and Anderson, when they would get together, like you got a little like over the top, like this Hollywood life and stuff like that, where it's just like so big and like so packed with meaning that it was almost too much. And I think on this, like it's just a bunch of pop songs that sound good and have catchy choruses, and you want to bob your head and clap your hands and whatever. I just think it's a very good pop album. Star Crazy, probably my favorite on the whole thing. Just one of the best hooks. Chorus is just so good on that. But Trash, Film Star, Lazy, Beautiful One, Saturday Night, just all really catchy songs. Oaks, not as good as Butler, especially not at this point when he was only 17. But does a good job. You miss Butler, but I think the band redefines their sound enough that it's not like a huge, massive, like, oh, the band's over, we lost the guitarist. And they do a great job just soldiering on with a very fun Britpop album. So 4 stars, still 4 stars.
All right, my number 3, I've got The Blue Hour. I think it's really good. Not sure if it technically is, but it feels like the longest album that they have. It's a soundtrack album. So it's not a bad thing. It's really dark and gothic and almost horror rock to open with that riff and that like ominous synthscape and As One, getting luring Suspiria vibes with the hums. The choir then comes in and we feel like we're at the 9th gate of hell. And then we get to more casual pop rock soon with Wastelands, which I think is a really good song. I think Mistress is great. It's about like this young boy catching his father cheating on his mother. I love the eeriness and the sense of doom and danger in most of these compositions. You feel like you are slowly walking next to a cliff, like in complete dark. For some reason, also, I don't know if it's him commentating his vocal range. I think Jason said this about an earlier album, but really sounds like the lead singer Placebo at times on this to me. It's crazy. I think some of the songs could be a bit more fleshed out and not rely so much on just doing the dark cinematic aesthetic, but I still like it. I feel like at this time, they're just kind of really in this mood and they nailed it, given what they had done on the previous album. Cold Hand brings some rock and roll life in, aptly Interpol vibes here, which I really like. And that song's got a great chug to it. Life is Golden, I dig a good bit. There's a real beauty to them when they go dark in this period. I really like. I would expect Rich Latta to really enjoy these albums. That gothic bastard of ours, big fan. We love him. Road Cool is cool little like sweet piece. Sorry, Joe, like a throwaway track, but I like it. Tides, I dig. More sort of Interpol vibes with Don't Be Afraid If Nobody Loves You, which I love. I think All the Wild Places has that great ornate darkness to it, and so does The Invisibles, which I love, which is kind of a weird choice to release as a single. I think it was the first single. Just a great album feel to this without many down spots. I think it's just got a really cool richness to it, and I like it a lot. It was probably the most surprising thing of this catalog given what I'd read about it, and I was like, well, this seems a bit out of their reach, but I think they did pretty damn well with it. So 3.5 for The Blue Hour, my number 3.
All right, my number 3 is the debut from 1993, Suede. This was a Mercury Prize winner. Some consider it the first Britpop album. It has what I consider to be the Britpop sound, which, like grunge, is admittedly a pretty vague thing, but I think the guitar tones and the drum sounds are pretty similar to the other Britpop bands of the era. I think where Suede really separate themselves from the pack, though, and where they really stood out is with Brett Anderson's vocals. Very cool, unique voice, really interesting, lots of personality. I don't think the songwriting on this record is that great, though. It feels pretty slapdash. I think there's a rawness that makes it attractive, the simple production, but I don't know. The songs just outside of the singles, the early singles that came out ahead of the record, I think are all really strong. But I think the rest of it feels almost like filler. The Drowners, I think, has a fantastic chorus, nice guitar work. That's one of those early singles. Animal Nitrate as well, very catchy. The guitar line in the chorus is really good. Throwing in all those chromatic notes. Metal Mickey, the other single, maybe not quite as strong, but I think it's a solid tune with some standout bass work. I think it's a good album overall. A few really strong singles. Production is not great, but the looseness of the sound, I think, serves the songs. The album does have like a certain energy to it, which is pretty cool, but I don't know. To me, just not incredibly catchy or memorable songs. They have a good front person with a lot of charisma, more than any of the other Britpop bands, so that goes a long way, I think, for it. It's an enjoyable record, but I think it's a pretty flawed record. 3.5 stars for Suede.
There's no way New Morning is better than this album. Get the hell out of here. What a joke. Good God. Joe, help me.
Listen, I'm with you, man. I'm with you. It's ridiculous. My number 3, I got Night Thoughts is number 3. And this is the first one I heard. So maybe that factors into my placement of it. But I had it at 4 stars back in 2016. I thought it was very good. And I, heard it without knowing anything about the history of the band, no idea. And I heard about it and I was like, oh, this band that I knew of, but never listened to has a new album out. I knew they were big in the Britpop era and I had no idea what to expect. And it's great. I listened to it again a couple times this week and my estimation of it has risen even further. But still 4 stars, a high 4 stars, but 4 stars nonetheless. And I think this feels like a complete band effort. I love the strings. I don't think they overwhelm anything, but Richard Oakes really on this album, I think more than any other, comes just with loads and loads of great riffs, wonderful tone throughout. And I think he really emerges. I feel like he was always in the shadow of somebody else, but on this album in particular, just really great stuff. No Tomorrow's fantastic. The guitar almost sounds a little bit like the Sheep outro from Pink Floyd, which I really love. I think the tone on it is amazing. And I think the guitar is even turned up a little like louder than it has been, or at least it was more noticeable to me than on any other album since Bernard Butler left. I Don't Know How to Reach You, just dramatic piece of cathartic rock and roll, just massive sound when it hits the outro. Brett Anderson's just howling through this big wall of sound. It's, Oakes isn't flashy at all, but I think his feel is great. And he does a little bit of the Butler thing where he's like constantly playing, which Butler got from Johnny Marr, but the twisty, windy riffs that kind of go throughout the whole song. I really like that style. What I'm trying to tell you, very cool, very groovy. I love the main theme, that guitar and synth doubled, this rising little chord progression sounds awesome. Tightrope, great. I love the big ringing chords on it. Like Kids, a little brighter, but there's still like a big dramatic weight to it, and pretty much the whole album. You got the strings, and everything feels very dramatic and big and just like very important, which can get, I thought on the Blue Hour it got a little too weighty, but I think it works a little bit better on this one. And I love the final track, Fur and the Feathers, and the lyrics, the fur and the feathers, the fox and the geese, the thrill of the chase. I think is great. A lot of that, like looking back to when you were young, and I think just the melodies, the riffs, the guitar on this album are great. The lyrics, very excellent from Anderson as always, and great rhythm section. The drum and the bass are real strong here. And the only thing maybe it could use is 1 or 2 more like lighter tracks, something a little bouncier, but I really don't have many complaints. 4 stars for Night Thoughts from 2016.
All right. Joe and I tend to line up on most Britpop stuff, so this is refreshing. My number 2 is Dogman Star. I've got it 4 stars. I think it's a great album. Compared to the original, or the debut, pardon me, it's a bit dronier. It's somehow bigger but thinner at times. Like A lot of the songs have a little bit less low end and a lot more reverb, except like in parts like the bass and the song. The power is really noticeable, so it's not always like that. And I think at times compared to the debut, it sacrifices a little bit of melody, trying really hard in this album to seem important, like Joe was saying. It is a bit bloated and seemingly trying to prove itself, but at times they succeed really well. Like on the Wild Ones, it just does it right so well. I like how the guitar casually slides in with this light crash, lighting a small fire under the sky. Very cool. The symphonic touches are mostly great. Daddy's Speeding is really cool, but some of it does feel a little bit unfinished, which apparently the album is because of band drama. I still love the vocals. Anderson is just on fire during this period. I didn't really know how good he was. Like I said at the beginning of the video, we didn't really know that much Suede. And man, I'm just in love with his vocal performances on these first two albums. Absolutely to die for. And I adore the drum sounds, like this late 80s into early 90s, big gated reverb, heavy drums, sounding huge. I just love that. It's right for me. Love it or hate it. I'm always going to love it. The Bowieisms are great, especially in the song The Power. This Hollywood Life is pretty bitching. There's an epicness to it that I really like, but it never gets out of control. Maybe at times reaching a little bit, but just grabs it with like the fingertips. Couple of duds. I don't care for The Two of Us or Black and Blue, but everything else is just so good and so dynamic and has just such great melodrama to it. I love the Asphalt World. I think it's really epic, and the layering on those vocals is so angelic and so good. Still Life is great, super epic and cinematic, ridiculously full of grandeur and just like pomp and circumstance, like they had just written like Beethoven's, symphony, and it just like, let's wrap it up as big as we can with fireworks going off. It's lovely and big and really ambitious, and I think it's awesome. And for a second album, like all right, we did this cool first album, and now let's do it even more, and that's awesome. 4 stars. I think it's great. Close to 4.5. And if you say anything else, then
you know what's coming. My number 2 is Dogman Star from 1994. I think it's a significantly better sounding record than the debut, much fuller sound, but it retains the energy and urgency of the debut, which I think is a good thing. Apparently they were trying to do less Bowie than they did on the first album and try to like go for some different influences, but I hear way more Bowie on this than I do on the debut. I also hear some Ian McCulloch, especially on We Are the Pigs. Some of the phrasing paired with his accent and the way he's singing feels very Echo and the Bunnymen. They also pull out additional production stuff on this record that wasn't on the first album. There's more strings and horns and background singers, all of which I think are used to pretty good effect. The Wild Ones is a cool ballad-esque sort of tune, which I think shows some growth as songwriters and as recording artists. However, the album does get into a little bit of too much balladry in the middle, I think, with that song, and then Daddy's Speeding and The Power all in a row. I think they're all decent tunes, but it does create a bit of a lull in the middle of the record. Anderson and Butler, of course, famously butted heads during the recording of this, resulting in Butler leaving before the record was finished. So they used some session players to finish out the album. I'm not exactly sure which tracks those are. I suspect it might be like those ballads in the middle because there's not a ton of guitar on them, it doesn't seem, or the guitar at least isn't as forward or as prominent. New Generation, though, I think is a really cool song. I love the use of horns on that one. Almost feels like a Ziggy Stardust tune. I assume it's Butler playing on that one. The playing on that one is really good, probably the best guitar work on the album. The piano ballad, Two of Us, I think highlights Anderson's vocal strengths really well. I can't imagine any of the other Britpop singers being able to pull off a track like that. I don't know. Looking on the Discord and hearing some people talk about this record, I don't really get the 5-star praise that I've seen for it. I'm not exactly quite sure what's missing on these first 2 records for me to generate that type of excitement for me to get me into like 4.5, 5-star territory. I don't know. Maybe I think it's just lacking. Maybe the sonic palette isn't quite there. Like the best moments for me are when the horns and the strings and the piano come in, and the core sound of the band, the guitar, the bass, and the drums for me is a bit samey throughout. I don't love the guitar tones on the early records. I think it's kind of ordinary. I think the playing is good, but not exceptional. Still a good album, very cool. And I know people are talking about Butler like he's a guitar god. He's just, I don't know. I don't hear it at all. He's a fine guitar player, but nothing special. 3.5.
You get excited by boredom, and it's not boring, so you're not excited.
Well, the track you cited as having the best guitar on the whole album is Richard Oakes. So
there you go.
Shows how wrong you are.
And I wasn't even aware of that. I didn't even know that. So there you go.
You did. That's interesting that you would pick that one out, because I don't remember a single second of that guitar. And I literally have notes about every second of Bernard Butler's greatness on all these tracks. Nothing on that one, though. My number 2 is Dogman Star, and it is very close to 5 stars for me. I only have it 4.5, but it's very close. We'll see if it ever gets there. It's wildly ambitious. Some critics thought it was too much. Some critics thought it was too much pomposity and just overblown, too much Bowie, too much, glammy. But I think it's fantastic. I think they merge and meld the glamness of the first album with like more paranoia and claustrophobia. Anderson's always sounds like he's on the edge of a breakdown or something. In his vocal style, which is great. I love his range, just love everything about him. And he was an avid reader of like William Blake and William Carroll and all these big poets and everything. He tried to infuse that into his lyrics. So of course it's gonna be grand and grandiose and over the top. And but I think that's the perfect style of lyrics for this. I think it works really well in comparison to the other Britpop bands. Oasis is kind of like meat and potatoes, and Blur's sort of country life, very green and little character sketches that they would do. This is very different. Like this is a lot more debauched and debased and sort of like ugliness, which I think is great. I love We Are the Pigs, got some of that 1984 references. But you got like these big brass horns coming in, which are great. Anderson's vocal performance, wonderfully unhinged. Heroin has a really cool like record scratch guitar sound underneath this jagged Butler lead, inspired by Marilyn Monroe. There's a little dissonance, lots of ugliness, and I love the juxtaposition between the golden voice of Anderson and sort of the grimy, dirty, sad, tragic lyrics. And I love Bernard Butler. I think he takes a lot from Johnny Marr. He's got like that itchy pick finger where he's just like always dancing across the fretboard. But I also think he sounds very forward. Like I hear a lot of stuff that like Johnny Greenwood would do on the bends, like very sort of like taking from the past and sort of channeling into the future, which is really cool. Really just fell in love with Butler during this week. Wish he'd been on a couple more albums. Sucks. Come on. Especially on the wild ones. I hear like a lot of fake plastic trees in the guitar, which is cool. Daddy Speeding, so dark and ominous, very cinematic, which I think is theatrical and cinematic is all over this album. New Generation, just a catchy rock song. The fanfare open of This Hollywood Life kind of sputters out in this big dark, another like really tragic song. And a very cool solo on that one. Great Brett Anderson falsetto. The Asphalt World, I think, is fantastic. It's 9 minutes and 25 seconds. I believe I read that Butler wanted to do a 25-minute guitar solo, or he did, and they didn't use all of it or something. So that would have been great. It's almost like prog rock. There's these big unwinding guitar solos, great drums, organs in there. And I think the only thing this album might be missing is like that ferocity of the debut. Like the debut is like really like we're young, we just want to screw and take drugs. And this one's like, okay, we want to do those things, but we also going to introduce all these other big weighty themes to it. And maybe it kind of, a little ponderous at times. It is long. It's almost 60 minutes, but 4.5 stars, just, huge, big, grandiose theatrical masterpiece. So yeah, really must listen for 1994. It kind of gets lost in the shuffle with all those other great 94 albums, but you got to listen to it. 4.5 stars.
All right. My number 1 is the correct number 1. It is the debut, Suede. close to 5. I only got a 4.5. But the vocals are the star of the show for me here. I think the guitar work by Butler is great. I don't think he's a guitar god. It's definitely better than Jason's giving credit for. I can't believe New Morning is this guy's number one. What a joke. What a loser you are. I do agree with Jason. I've got some serious Echo and the Bunnymen, Aileen McCulloch kind of vibes here. I think So Young rules. I love that song so friggin' much. It's so cool, so hot, so fresh. He sounds like more of like with Ian McCulloch a little bit, and then like this nerdy yet more effeminate and girly like Morrissey a little bit. Like it's pretty cool. Like if Morrissey were in Cocteau Twins or something, it's pretty cool. Love the thin, glowing, like jangly production. Animal Nitrate is really great, smooth guitar lead with that super British sound. And I agree. Like I think he influenced like a lot of Oasis and Radiohead and stuff like that. And there's just such great desperation to like Anderson's vocals. It's just fantastic. It's so dire and like, I'm going to kill myself if I don't get my point across here when I'm singing. Like, it's just awesome. I love his falsetto and his high register. She's Not Dead is really pretty and dreamy. Moving is fun. And I love those guitar scrapes. The bass and the little breakdown is great. It's like the sick, windy little bluesy solo in it. Love the little cackle in his voice. Like he can be kind of humorous while he's doing it. I love that If You Can't Take It, I Can't Take It line. The big guitars and Pantomime Horse are great. Perfect kind of update to glam for here. I think this is like glam for the early 90s. It's just perfect. Perfectly wallowing in personalized lyrics while having this glammy kind of posture. Drowners is this cool hard rocker with this beautiful lifting chorus in it. A lot of heart on the album too, like Sleeping Pills and this acquiescent kind of affectionate lullaby. It's great. There might be a few like less exciting tracks like Metal Mickey, but it's still pretty good. I like the Next Life piano ballad to close. It's just perfect. It's really airy and original, and it's got like all the right amount of influential like touches with glam and all this other stuff, but it's just this really like personal, affectionate rock record with these huge pieces of drama written into the composition, and I think it's great. It's so much better than New Morning. I might not even listen to what's about to be said, but go ahead.
All right. My number one is New Morning, and I'm not here to argue that it's a great record at all. It's a good record. It's not even a very good record. I have it at 3.5 stars. It's not an edgy record. It's not breaking new ground. It sounds like Better Than Ezra. It sounds like Travis. It sounds like early Coldplay. That said, it's a very good sounding record, and I think the songwriting is really good. Really cool, interesting chord changes all over this record. I love the chord progression on Obsessions. The bass playing all over this record is incredible. Probably the best bass record in the catalog. You know, Anderson said he regrets making it because it's kind of torn between an electronic record and a folk record, and it ends up coming out a bit confused. And I don't think it comes out confused. I think it's less essential sounding than the early records. But rather than it just like hearing it as a dull record, I think it's really mature. I think it's professional. It's refined. It's polished. Street Life has some of those electronic elements, but is a good upbeat rock song with excellent bass work on it from Mat Osman, who's a really great player. One Hit to the Body is really cool. I think Anderson's voice sounds better on this than any other record. He's coming down from that super high nasal quality that he has on Head Music. He's clean and sober on this record. I think you can tell his voice is just crystal clear. You know, I think it's really good. 3.5 star record. You know, it's not a groundbreaking record. I don't think Suede is a great band. I think they're a good band with a bunch of good records, and this is one of them. I think it's got the best songs on it. So there you go. Number one.
I don't know if I can continue. I don't know if I can go on with my number one. It's Suede, obviously. The debut from 93. An album I find so excellent that I actually have to reduce my scores for other Britpop albums from the same year, because this one is just clearly better. So I don't think I can have Modern Life is Rubbish or Pablo Honey as high as I do. So I'm going to bump them down 0.5 star to make way for the 5 stars of Suede. It's just in comparison, everything else kind of sounds like crap now. And this is how it is. It's much better than Modern Life is Rubbish, and I think it's much better than Pablo Honey, which I had as sort of my two highlights of Britpop pre-94. And I almost had this on my 93 album of the year list, and I don't know what held me back then that I get now. Maybe I just wasn't quite used to Anderson's vocals as much, because they are out there. They're definitely weird. They don't fit into the sort of like nice British boy qualities of, you know, Blur and bands like that. Even Pulp, I feel like they're like a little easier to take. Like you really have to like get into Anderson's sky high falsetto, and you know, he's very urgent. It's sexy though. There's a little sexiness to it, to the urgency. You know, every drug and sexual liaison could be like the catastrophic end of the world. Like he just makes everything sound so important and have huge consequences, which I think is great. You know, and that's what Suede's all about: youth, sex, drugs, rock and roll. So Young, Animal Nitrate, The Drowners, Metal Mickey all have a real glammy sound to them, but like a dirty, like this is the 90s, like there's pollution everywhere, and you know, you could catch an STD and die, but like you're still gonna do it, and like, you know, whatever, doesn't matter. And I think the difference between them and all the other Britpop bands, at least in the beginning, is that sort of like real like sexiness. Like none of the other bands were that sexy. So Suede definitely wins the sexy battle for the Britpop, thanks to Anderson. And I think Butler is way ahead of the game as far as guitar. A lot of Johnny Marr, a lot of those ringing chords, the creative fills, not a lot of solos, constantly moving around the fretboard, constantly filling things in, lots of longer riffs. And I like the guitar tones. I think there's a lot of, you know, distortion, sounds like a buzz saw, but can also be really pretty, like on Pantomime Horse and Sleeping Pills, which are just gorgeous. Really like the guitar on those. Just the tone and the sound, and like it sounds like future Britpop. It sounds like Butler was ahead of the game there. And I love So Young. I love the debut. Just when Anderson calls out the lyrics and that super high falsetto, you kind of know what's coming. It's great. Moving sounds a lot like Shakespeare's Sister. It's got like really fast slashing guitars throughout, which is great. You know, there's a lot of like Twisted Sexuality and Animal Nitrate. Pantomime Horse, I feel like, is, you know, kind of Smithsy. Got that swirling psychedelic sound from like Queen is Dead and Strange Days Here We Come. But I just think every song on here, maybe you don't need Animal Lover because you already have Animal Nitrate, and you don't really need two songs about animals. But I think every track is just great, so catchy, so unique, so cool. The guitar is fantastic. I love how dirty and just like grimy this whole record is, but sexy also. So 5 stars, easy for Suede from 93.
All right, there you have it. Suede in the books. I'm going to take a beating on this one, I think, but that's all right. Let us know what you think of our list. Drop it down in the comments. Let us know what your own ranking is. Make sure you hit the like button and subscribe if you haven't done so already. We're going to talk a bit more Suede this week with our top 10 songs, and we'll be getting into the battle of the Britpop bands on our side 3, so check back for those videos. Thanks for watching. We'll see you in the next one.